Lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If we could have roll call.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Here.
Heil,
Present.
Kistner,
Present.
Monette,
Here.
Chairperson Parker.
Present. Moving on to the approval of the minutes from our meeting on February 17th, 2015. Do we have any revisions or do we have a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes for February 17th.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Kistner,
Yes.
Monette,
Yes.
Sweeney,
Yes.
Heil,
Yes.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes. Going on to public forum, this is an opportunity for the public to address the commission on items of interest to the public that are not listed on the agenda. Because of restrictions imposed by the Brown Act, the commission may not engage in discussion nor take action on matters not described on the agenda. Please observe the time limit of 3 minutes. Would anyone like to speak at public forum?
Jay Green, 1516 Oak Avenue. For the past 18 months, almost 2 years, the residents of the 1,400 and 1,500 blocks of Oak Avenue have been impacted by severe parking congestion arising not from visitors to the town visiting shops on Main Street, but rather employees of businesses on Main Street. It started with the opening of French Blue, now Archetype, a few years ago, and also we know a number of the architects employed by Howard Backen have been using Oak Avenue as a parking lot. And this situation is about to get worse. We appealed to council. We, the residents of these two blocks, appealed to council asking for 3-hour limitation on parking and placards for residents because some residents do not have driveways and cannot even find a parking space on the street on which they live. The council talked the subject to death 18 months ago, and basically nothing was done. Now, the Morrison Funeral Home with an address on Vintage Avenue has been bought, I understand, and has also opened up operations at what was the former Christian Science reading room on the corner of Pine and Oak. And they are claiming, I understand, that they are using this space for offices. And I firmly disagree with that contention. A casket was observed leaving the premises the other evening, and I've seen the curb blocked off in front with a notification, please don't park because services are in progress. And there's also an indication that somebody used the doctor's parking lot across the street and put up a sign saying reserved for family. So this is going to impact the parking situation even more severely. So my request to you is twofold. Number one, kindly agendize discussion at a future meeting, soon to be future meeting, I hope, to discuss the parking situation on Oak Avenue, 1,400 and 1,500 blocks between Adams and Madrona. Secondly, I ask you to look into the application or the information that has been given you by Morrison Funeral Home, for I think it is highly suspicious. They are claiming office use. They are not using the premises as offices, or they may be doing so partially, but there are seats for at least 75 people in the main room in that building, and they clearly intend to conduct memorial services, funeral services, etc. This is a new use, and I believe this requires a use permit application. So I ask you to look into these two matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, staff has been made aware of the situation. I went and spoke with the people running Morrison Funeral Home the other day. They assured me that they are using office space, or the renting office space in that location. It appeared that they were doing so. I received a phone call from the owner, I believe, of the space today, and she indicated they are indeed renting an office space. She mentioned that there's a room there called the Magnolia Room that I believe can be used for event space. We have not had time to look into that at this time, but staff is going to look into it further and see what is allowed in that space and what is not.
Okay, thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak at public forum? Seeing none, I will close public forum and move on to our consent calendar. It looks like we have 2 items on our consent calendar this evening. Would anyone like to pull an item to discuss, or are we comfortable with it?
I am recused on the second item.
Okay, so we're going to need 2 motions for that. We'll need one for item number PL 14-008 and another for 1 Indian 009, so that Commissioner Howell can recuse himself. For number, excuse me?
Public forum.
Oh, would anyone like to speak at public forum? Seeing none, or public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Do we have a motion for the consent calendar?
I move that we approve PL 14-008.
Second.
Okay.
And then if we have a motion for PL 15-009, we can do a double roll call.
I move that we approve that one also.
Second.
Commissioner Kistner,
Yes.
Heil,
Yes as to the first and abstain on the second.
Monette,
Yes.
Sweeney,
Yes.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes.
Opportunity for the second one.
I opened it for both.
She asked for
Public comment was for all consent items, yes. Unless someone would like to speak on either of the items, I will. Yeah. Sorry.
What would staff's recommendation be?
Yeah, what would staff, I mean, we've already voted.
I think it's appropriate to take testimony, and then if the commission feels like they need to change their position, then they can make a motion to do so. But I think that's probably the best course.
All right, we'll open up. Jeff?
Well, first he would pull the item from the consent
Yeah,
calendar.
so
right?
we're gonna, which item?
What is it?
Which item do you want to pull? Okay,
I will leave.
all right, thank you. Okay, so we're going to be pulling PL 14-009, it's design review for 880 College Avenue, Celina Montessori School. Can we get a brief staff report before we hear public comment?
Applicant's proposing to construct a new 2,400 square foot storage structure on the Montessori School property at 880 College Avenue. The proposed building will be located in the northwest portion of the school grounds, approximately 90 feet from the northern property boundary and 40 feet from the western property boundary. The structure will be constructed using a post and beam method with concrete slab floor and corrugated metal siding and roofing. The main ridge height of the structure will be approximately 16 feet, and it will be used to provide storage space and support functions to the Montessori School.
Thank you.
Jeff Ellsworth, Sylvaner. I just wanted to check that there was no other planned use for this other than as a storage structure, that's what its use now and in the future would be.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally a concrete slab with siding. There's and no other uses are proposed. So
That would be my understanding.
It's
Also,
not insulated or.
And the only electrical is, there's no plumbing other than for the fire sprinklers that are per
Okay,
our
so
fire
there's been
department.
no other discussion about this turning into something else later?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'll close public comment and ask our fellow commissioners if you would like to have a revote.
Move that we approve PL 15007.
09.
09. Well, mine says 7. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm reading the wrong place. Anyway, I move that we approve PL 15009.
Second.
Commissioner Kistner,
Yes.
Monette,
Yes.
Sweeney,
Yes.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes, and if we could go grab Commissioner Heil, that would be great. Okay. Okay, moving on to item number 7. This was continued from our February 17th meeting. This is item PL 15-007. It's a use permit amendment, and if we could have an updated staff report, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Chairperson Parker. This application was originally presented at the February 17th, 2015 Planning Commission meeting, where there was a sense that the condition limiting the items for sale presented by staff was too restrictive and difficult to enforce. Therefore, the item was continued to tonight with direction that staff work to formulate a new approach. Since that time, staff has received input from the applicant and other interested parties. Project opponents have advocated further restricting allowable items for sale by imposing material, style, and price limitations. However, staff has consulted with the city attorney, who has advised that there are not only enforcement issues, but serious legal implications in attempting to regulate the types, materials, price, etc. of jewelry being sold, and should thus be avoided. Instead, the focus should be on whether to approve or deny a jewelry store at this particular location. As such, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the project with a condition prohibiting the sale of bridal sets, estate jewelry, and loose stones. A resolution with these conditions is included. Note that these conditions were voluntarily agreed to by the applicant and therefore are legally defensible. Staff feels this approach is the most workable as it meets a majority of what the applicant is requesting. It ensures a variety in the type of jewelry stores downtown as enforceable from our perspective. Victor, is there anything you'd like to add? No. Okay, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions of staff at this time? All right, I'd like to open up the public hearing, and if the applicant would.
I do have a question of staff. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm just a little confused. You said that we were advised to look at this as an application for a jewelry store.
Correct.
And then you're advising that we accept the permit modifications. I'm not sure what.
We've included a condition of approval that limits bridal jewelry, estate jewelry, and loose stones, and that was voluntarily agreed to by the applicant,
I
and
see.
therefore it's legally defensible.
Otherwise, it is considered a permit for a jewelry store with those caveats. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see everybody again. I'm Sam Dahlia. After the last meeting, we went and spoke to city staff, and we came up with a resolution that I feel works for everybody, deciding to take away bridal sets, estate jewelry, and loose stones. I think this resolution is not only fair, it's enforceable. That was an issue last time we spoke, what's actually enforceable, what's not enforceable. I think staff agrees that this is actually pretty easy to enforce, and I'm more than willing to comply with that permit. You can see by our cooperation and willingness to work with the city and kind of get through this process. We want to help the commission come up with the right decision, and the right decision is hopefully just to approve this permit with that resolution, those restrictions. So I think if anybody has any questions, let me know.
If you run into challenges with your business and find that your current inventory is not selling well and you want to venture off into some of these other areas, what course of action will you take?
At this point, I think the only course of action that I would come back to the city and ask for an amendment for that use permit. I don't see myself ever getting into these types of lines. They're well, represented in town. My whole business model is to carry stuff that nobody else has. I don't see myself ever trying to get into bridal sets or estate jewelry, these loose stones, but I can't tell the future. In the event something like that comes about, I think the only course of action is to come back, get an amendment for that use permit. But these are well represented in town already. Any other questions?
Does anyone else have any other questions for the applicant? Thank you. We'll ask you to come back up if there's a need.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Would anyone else like to speak at public hearing?
Hi, Bobby Clark from David's Jewelers. Under the heading of staff discussion, the difficulty of enforcing percentage limitations is discussed, and it is stated that it is easier and less ambiguous to enforce the type of jewelry being sold as long as the distinction of jewelry and type is well defined. Under the staff recommendations, it is recommended that the Commission approve the project with the following exclusions: bridal sets, estate jewelry, and loose stones. Bridal sets. What is meant by a bridal set? Does that mean an engagement and wedding ring that fit together such that they would not be paired with any other piece? If so, I have one in my store. And in 32 years of business, I bet I've sold fewer than 32. We sell lots of engagement rings. We sell lots of wedding rings. They are sold individually, not as sets. And if you go online and search bridal set, you will not find a definition. You will see lots of offers for sale of all sorts of different things, but you will not see a definition. That defines and limits nothing. If by bridal set you mean wedding and engagement rings, then you must consider the definition of an engagement ring. It is a ring given in betrothal of marriage. Over the years, we have sold any number of rings as wedding rings, often with diamonds, other times with colored stones, often of gold or platinum, but also of metals such as silver and titanium. If, in fact, this is what you mean by bridal sets, then Pavati cannot carry rings. That's definitely a limitation. Estate jewelry. To my knowledge, there's one store offering estate jewelry in St. Helena. So does it need to be limited? I don't know. Loose gems. Well, the offering of loose gems doesn't limit the sale of finished jewelry in any way whatsoever. I do not believe that these exclusions will in any way create a meaningful distinction between the applicant's operation and other jewelry stores in town, as is suggested in the staff discussion. These limitations will neither ensure variety, nor will they be enforceable. The only way to effect any sort of limitation is to do so by employing clear and tangible guidelines. Option 1 does not do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak at public hearing?
David Clark, 1343 Main. Good evening, Commissioners. The problem here is we already have too many fine jewelry stores. Is there anyone that says we need more? Even the applicant tried to justify his permit by saying that he'll address the lower price range, averaging around $240, thinking that you'd approve that. As you've seen from the recent letters, the other jewelers disagree with Mr. Dahlia's statement to you at the last hearing, that they're all fine with his permit application. Mr. Dahlia tells us that when he broke the rules, he was just trying to survive. In business, survival is called competition. And in any competition, there are rules. Although Pavati Collections has taken plenty of liberties with the rules, nobody is suggesting punishment or discrimination against Pavati, but there are no reasons for discriminating for them in a way that sets precedent and will compromise the general plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak at public hearing forum? Comment?
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission, and Victor and Aaron, thanks again for you guys' help on coming here with what we believe is a fair and equitable way to help Sam Dahlia attain his application for his use permit. I would just like to say that when I picked up the St. Helena Star this week, it obviously has some very sobering financial forecasts for our city. What we're talking about here is welcoming business, is helping business, helping business owners in St. Helena. Sam Dahlia, not to rehash the past, clearly came and said, hey, here's what I've done and here's what I'm doing to rectify it. I'm going to start the process. I'm going to go through and come to you and ask you for the permission to do what I have been doing outside of what I was allowed to do. This is not the addition of a new jewelry store. There is no cap on the number of jewelry stores in this town. This is about someone who's moving his business up the street and asking for permission to be able to comply with the business that he's found to be able to work. I went with Sam to speak with Aaron and Victor to talk about how we could best define what would help Sam achieve this use permit. What Sam didn't want to do was duplicate what was happening down the street with the other jewelry stores. So we did come up with the language with Victor and Aaron's help to say, we won't have bridal sets. Now, agreed that a bridal set could be an engagement and a wedding ring sold together, but the intent was not to just exclude those things. It's the wedding ring, the engagement ring, the traditional style of those types of items. The estate jewelry is something that's represented here in town also. So when we went and spoke with Aaron and Victor, after leaving this meeting, we understood it to mean that Sam's use permit, which quite frankly he would be entitled to apply for just a jewelry store period, and the other jewelry stores in town should not be the ones to dictate who comes to town and who doesn't, and who can sell what and who doesn't. However, Sam went back to the city to try to do something cooperative, and I think you'll find what's in front of you is just that. We're at a crossroads here in our city. Up the street in Calistoga, I was there today. It's bustling, there's a fervor, there's a vision that things are happening, and they are. In Yountville, take a look. They had a perfectly good park that they're completely redoing just to put some nice, better material in there. Downtown Napa is on fire. Hotels, tourists, people, restaurants all go to those different locations. What we're talking about is one jewelry store in our town that's been here to move up the street, to give him the opportunity to have that business here, to give the people who come to this town the opportunity to buy items like this that you don't see at other stores. Items like this vase, items like the different jewelry that's around, item like the handmade box there from someone in Napa. I mean, these are items that are diverse. And while I appreciate people looking at this as from a competitive nature and trying to keep somebody out, that's not the intent of what we're here to do. We're simply here to ask that Sam's use permit be approved with the conditions that we've agreed to, or he's agreed to make it fair for everybody. And that in and of itself didn't have to happen. But we came to you with the intent that this always started with from the very beginning, to allow Sam to operate his business. When we think of what's going on in the future here of this town, I would strongly encourage you to help us keep the St. Helena is open for business sign on. Please don't turn that off. We have enough challenges. I walked down Main Street again today, and I stepped on a couple of those little pavers, and they were loose. And it's just a matter of time before somebody falls there. We have work to do in this city, and it does not involve competitive people dictating what can and can't happen for people that want to open things here in this town. It's up to you. You're the planning commission. You 5 people. Please consider what's in front of you and know that it's a good thing for this town. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak at public hearing? Seeing none, I'd like to invite the applicant back up if you feel the need.
And anybody have any questions?
Does anyone have any questions?
I guess I have one of the applicant at this point. Would you, well, I guess the right word is, would you view a statement on the condition rather than bridal sets of engagement rings or wedding rings instead of bridal sets? I think that, it's been pointed out that, a set is sold as a set versus independent rings sold as a ring.
It's not a problem.
Yeah, and I had a similar question. Just change it traditional bridal jewelry.
Traditional bridal jewelry is a good, it's good language. Whatever.
Yeah, I my fellow commissioners, I like the wording of traditional bridal jewelry.
I'd even take traditional. I would even strike traditional and say bridal jewelry, and jewelry to be sold purpose of weddings, bridal. I mean, I don't think we need to get that specific.
Okay. That's my only question for the applicant at this point.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if anybody else has any.
Would anyone else like to speak at public hearing? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and invite commissioner deliberation and discussion.
I have a question for staff. Is it possible to tie this approval to this applicant as opposed to this location so that?
It is not. We spoke with Kevin, the city attorney, today, and that's not something we can legally do. There are extreme circumstances where it might be possible, but for an instance like this, no.
So if we approve this, we're approving for this location in perpetuity?
Yep.
I guess piggybacking on that, is there a a means by which we could have a hearing for the old space, for the use permit for the old space, where we would in effect, end that use at that space?
I don't believe so, and that space is for, the use permit is for Native American
jewelry
things. Jewelry is an ancillary use, maximum 35%.
So that's the use permit that's being left behind.
Right.
It isn't destroyed. Essentially, it runs with the land at that new space.
It does.
And if something else were to come in, it would need to come in for a use permit amendment.
Absolutely.
Is there a method of canceling? I mean, it's just the notification of the owners, or there's not a way to cancel a use permit? Even notifying the owners and saying...
Technically, you can do what's called, you can revoke the use permit, but you would need grounds, and usually that relates to public health, safety, and other nuisance kinds of issues. So,
not just because we want to clean up our use permits. Okay.
Correct. I think in this case, staff is learned something as part of this process too, in terms of sensitivity to certain kinds of uses, and anybody that's coming in looking to go to that space, if it's clear that they're not going to completely meet that exact use permit, they're likely going to be in front of the commission. So,
can you say what the use permit is for the current address, the current use permit?
I absolutely can. So the current use permit at 1210 allows for a men's and women's clothing store with ancillary jewelry and fabric and garment samples and limited art glass products.
Does anyone else have any comments? Because if we don't, I see that the Clarks would like to make a comment, and I was willing to open up public hearing again, if everyone's okay with that. All right. I'm going to open up the public hearing again.
David Clark. Not so much a comment as a question. When you say bridal, are you going to mean just rings? Because in a bridal situation, there's a wedding gift. It may be a strand of pearls. It might be earrings. It could be a diamond bracelet. The rings themselves, as my wife was explaining, we've done sapphire rings for engagement rings. We've done turquoise rings for engagement rings. All manner of gemstones, all manner of metals. And there isn't a distinct definition other than it is a ring, that an engagement ring is a ring of betrothal. So, I can ask you to marry me and present you with whatever ring. It could be a ring of steel, a band of steel. And the same is true of a wedding ring. So how are we getting to any concise definition here? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be closing the public.
I have another question of staff. At some point, was there talk about trading the permits from the old location to the new location? That is not possible either.
By law, they run with the land.
Gotcha.
And I see a gentleman in the audience would like to, nope, oh, right. Would anyone else like to speak at public hearing? Okay.
Bobby Clark, 1343 Main Street. Just as I had said about the bridal set definition, you can go online to try to get some handle on what this means. I searched and searched for bridal jewelry. Again, there is no definition because it's just too broad of a base. Anything could be used as part of the jewelry worn by a bride. So it just needs better clarification. Bridal jewelry is no limitation at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, again, Jeff Feeney. what people give for wedding gifts can be anything. If I'd have given my wife a Gotch cheeseburger and said, "Will you marry me?" does that automatically get taken off the list as something that can be sold? If I gave my wife this vase for a wedding gift and said, "Will you marry me?" and we'll put flowers in here to always remember our day together where we got engaged, would that then become an excluded item? What we've done is come to you with something that's reasonable. We can split this ad nauseum forever and be here all night. The fact of the matter is, Sam does not have to and did not have to agree to have anything excluded from his permit. Maybe the cleanest way is to take everything out and just give him a jewelry store permit and let him operate his jewelry store in the way that he sees fit to conduct his business with what he sells. What we've tried to do here is come up with a compromise. And clearly, there are people that don't want to have this happen. And I can understand that. If I were them, I might feel the same way. But the fact of the matter is, you cannot take that away from Sam just because somebody else comes up with something that somebody gave somebody for a wedding gift. That's unfair. That's not right. And that's not the intent of why we're here. So please, consider what's in front of you. What is clearly defined? Life? Time? Space? What? Things are meant to be reasonably looked at by reasonable people and understood. Please. Thank you.
Jeff Meyer, 1269 Allen. I think you should challenge their use permit. They shouldn't have exclusive right to sell certain kinds of jewelry in this town. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak at public hearing? Okay, I'm going to close it. And I am going to just, I have a comment. Just the reason I said traditional is because I think it's a reasonable person can define that as the traditional diamonds and pearls and more higher end precious stones. And that's why I like the word traditional. It kind of keeps clear. And, you know, if you guys aren't comfortable with that, it's not a deal breaker for me. But that is why I threw out the traditional as that part of the compromise. And I'm looking at Sam and he's nodding, and I don't think he's in the business of bringing in pearls and diamonds. So I don't think he has. When, you know, you think of engagement and bridal jewelry, you think those are the two you go to. But if you guys want just a bridal jewelry, it's just kind of a little bit more of a compromise.
I'm going to be up front. I really don't think we should approve it, period. I think we have a permit that Aaron has described perfectly, and I think we have another permit up the street. I think that that both general plans the new general plan, if you read it, is going to call for diversity downtown, and the old general plan calls for not tourist serving. Thank you. And my opinion is that I don't think we should approve this.
Yeah, I was thinking. I think it would be, as Jeff said, it would have been better if Mr. Dahlia had just applied for a jewelry store, because I think that anything that has 80% jewelry is a jewelry store. I mean, that's how. And it seems like it's the tail wagging the dog. You know, we're trying to adapt the permit to the business, and I think it's supposed to be that the business adapts to the permit. And since this permit will run with the property, it's kind of beyond the details of what Mr. Dahlia is asking for, and I have a lot of sympathy for what you're asking for and for your case. I really truly do, and for what you and Mr. Sweeney have been saying. But this is it has a more global application. This permit runs with the store. That means you are applying for another jewelry store. That means another jewelry store in town. And I'm going to quote what was brought to my attention in one of the letters that I received, that the Planning Commission found in August of 2014 that the city's need for art galleries is adequately served by the existing businesses in the central business district. and that no additional art galleries should be located in the central business district. Now, I don't know if you can make that statement. I cannot be the judge to say that I can find that the city's need for more jewelry stores, that the city's need for jewelry stores is adequately served by the existing businesses. I can't make that decision. But given the public and the business testimony on this permit amendment application, I cannot support this application until the requested dialogue between the city staff, the business community, and the citizens of this town has taken place, and a clear directive regarding the desired diversity and questions of redundancy have been made. And so until that happens, I think there should be a moratorium on all permits for art galleries, jewelry stores, and wine tasting rooms in the central business district until that dialogue takes place. But that's kind of an even broader issue. But because this is really an application for another jewelry store, without that dialogue, I can't approve it, no matter what details and efforts on your part. And I believe there were sincere efforts, Mr. Dahlia, whatever those are. The broader issue is more important here for me. I think the community impact is more important than trying to get this thing to fit that doesn't really fit. And I think that we should keep the permit that's there. And I cannot support the request for amendment either.
I think at this point,
Well, could I ask staff a question? Is that even a legal option? I mean, my understanding is we have to, regardless of what the current and discussed versions of the new general plan will be, and cities, the city and the chamber's view at trying to come up with business diversity on Main Street and some kind of vision for that, those items don't exist yet. So we operate within our current general plan, and there is no moratorium or there is no cap on the number of any type of business.
No, I wasn't suggesting that's not what I'm basing my decision on. That was an opinion. But based on the things that I said, I thought that we should uphold the permit that's there and not approve an amended permit. That's what I meant. I'm sorry if I didn't speak clearly. Thank you.
I mean, my biggest concern is I don't want to make an established business not be able to be a functioning established business. I also, to be perfectly frank, don't think that whoever goes into Mr. Dahlia's old space is going to be bringing Native American art and probably is going to wipe out the use permit that's there when they try to fill the space. So we'll be able to clean that one out by the next use. I just don't think that, I just have a really hard time. I don't absolutely love the use permit, but I also feel that St. Helena is struggling right now, and we do need, and to turn away an established business just seems to be kind of shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. And I can find many distinctions between his store and other jewelry stores in town that I think make it add to a diversity argument. I do think that there are, too many jewelry stores, yes, but I do think that his jewelry store is different enough, and maybe he can bring other things to it to make it even more different and diverse from the city. I also don't like, I don't like the comparison to St. Helena to other towns in the valley, because every town is different, and I think that we do need to remember that we're working within, unfortunately, our microcosm, and we have a lot of struggles right now that we need to focus on. And I don't think that Mr. Dahlia's store is going to be the store that kills St. Helena. I think that it will be a nice addition. It's an adorable small space, and I just kind of listening to myself speak, I'm in support of the use permit.
I just want to comment on the established business part. It is an established business, but it's an established business that is not in compliance with the permit.
But his use permit is to have in compliance established business, a business plan that is working for him. It's
right, but again,
well, I think the simple fact of the matter is the old space is vacant now.
Yeah, the other space is still vacant.
He has a current. I understand that, but he has a current permit. It should have been It should have happened before the movement.
I mean, I understand. Was the procedure followed? No. But he's apologized. He's atoned. He's going to the right pathway now to have the use permit.
Well, I would agree entirely, except that the permit that's being asked for now is for another jewelry store, essentially, which is a controversial issue. It's not just a simple, okay, this is a business. Of course, we welcome you. It was a business out of compliance. That if it's in compliance, it's another kind of business altogether. That is a rather controversial one in terms of whether we should expand that kind of
I just feel that we're always going to follow into the the whole of it's controversial, so we shouldn't do it, and we're going to not have our city thrive. I mean, what? So we just say no to every single use permit that
No,
is.
not to every single use permit. We say yes to use permits that are in compliance with the general plan and the growth management part of the general plan and the housing, not the housing element of it. That's, yes, we can, of course, we can approve businesses that are in compliance with what the town has set up. And if we want to change that, we need to do that with a dialogue that we've asked for between the business community, the city government, and the public. And maybe it's time to make those changes. It very well could be. But I really don't think that I don't feel competent to make these kinds of decisions without some guidelines from that kind of a dialogue.
And I understand that, and I agree with that to a certain point, but I also don't feel like holding back a business use permit for, again, an established business, and yes, was out of compliance in its former location, but I don't think that that's smart planning.
Yeah, so back to planning, I mean, as a matter of planning, I mean, I think this is obviously the conundrum that is before our city, and has been for the last 5 years. And the reason that we did, the previous council and the current council is taking up the general plan, and this is the tough discussion that we all have to have as a community. And the fact of the matter is it hasn't happened fully yet, or it hasn't been legally adopted, and we haven't revisited the municipal codes to reflect that new vision for our town. I mean, I think we've said this over and over again, we're between a rock and a hard place because we're in this no man's land. At the same time, I think Mr. Clark, eloquently pointed out, and I think actually we owe a debt of gratitude to Mr. Clark for kind of exposing the inconsistencies in use permits and in use permit enforcement in general and everything. I think what we have before us is a much cleaner use permit. It has a much cleaner and enforceable provision, and I tend to focus on actually the use and our current guidelines, and I think that unlike the art gallery where it seemed that there was an absolute argument for saturation, I'm not saying there isn't an argument for saturation for jewelry stores. I'm just not sure that argument has been made and demonstrated and supported with as much evidence as it was for the art gallery. So I'm not in moratorium mode on jewelry stores per se. Partly because, of course, this is moving an existing jewelry store of one sort and putting in a jewelry store of another sort 98 feet away. I think that, again, this is why I would love to have tonight a use permit hearing for his previous space and modify it to the next use at the same time. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury, and we leave ourselves open to creating a new jewelry store, essentially adding a jewelry store in net. And that's what I'm what I'm most uncomfortable with. I'm not as uncomfortable with approving this with the condition that has been laid out, but I'm uncomfortable with the ability for there to be an opening for a second Native American jewelry store, et cetera, at the old location without us having even in one hearing. I mean, nothing. It could go in tomorrow with that use permit that is running with the land down the street. With that said, I think, as a planning commission, I think we are. This is obviously a use permit. It requires that we use our quasi-judicial role and make findings and look at the bigger picture. And I think you've argued eloquently, Commissioner Parker, that I don't think, or Chair Parker, that this use permit is going to make or break St. Helena and in its economic, grand scheme. I think the Clarks have argued also eloquently that, that there are a number of jewelry stores that are closed on Sundays. and open and not closed during the week. And that says something about the use, about whether it's local or tourist serving or primary local, primarily tourist. And I don't know if it's even up for consideration whether we look at that as a way, that we could potentially condition this use permit to, to essentially bring that more into the family of what exists on the ground. But I think, I think that obviously we've come to this point. We've beat this one to death. It's how big is the space, Aaron? 500 square feet. I mean, I think that, while I'm not adverse to standing on principle. I mean, I think that, in principle, if someone wants to come in fresh out of town with a brand new use permit for a jewelry store of 500 square feet or more, or whatever, a brand new use, I would maybe not be able to make the findings that we need to make tonight. But, that's where I am.
Well, with respect to what you said about, I mean, I think I am not comfortable with a precedent of someone who's in violation of their permit then coming and getting permission to have a business that if someone fresh were coming into town would
I would argue that first and foremost, and this often is repeated in these chambers, we don't set a precedent. We make unique findings with each and every use permit. Whenever it's a discretionary permit, we have the authority to approve or deny.
People bring up the precedent as a red herring as a scare tactic.
The precedent isn't
really not a red herring because it's
but
part
legally
of the language.
that is the case.
But it's part of the language in the general plan. They talk about precedents. That's not true. It's not a red herring. I think it is setting a precedent. I mean, it's been done. Even if it weren't a precedent, I don't approve of someone who has broken who has not gone along with the permit and moved the business to another place without going through the proper channels. I don't think it's appropriate to then allow a completely new permit on an item that is controversial and which actually there are several findings that it doesn't meet. There, to my mind, 6, 7, 8. There are findings that aren't met as well as these broader issues. So anyway, I'm not comfortable with saying this is okay. It's okay that this permit is now for a jewelry store, and that jewelry store is going to be another jewelry store from now on.
And I would say that 3.4.4 of the 93 general plan says it prohibit the development of any new retail space uses that are orientated primary toward tourists. And I think that the jewelry stores are primary toward tourists. So whether it's new or whether he's moving it, and then it allows to have two rather than one, and I can't vote for it.
And with regard to economic vitality, a lot of the purchases in jewelry stores are mailed to the place where the people who are buying them live, which is many times not in the county of Napa. So,
but do you have that as a fact, or
yes,
that's anecdotal?
I've spoken. No, it's anecdotal in the sense I've spoken to jewelry store owners who say that in town.
This is a challenging one. I mean, I think we have an established business person who's been here for years, who has, albeit not played by all the rules, but not in a malicious way, because he hasn't been paying attention. And on the opposition, we have some very valid input from other also long-term established merchants here in town. However, the codes that as I understand them to be, don't give us the latitude to determine how many of a certain type of store we're going to have and when we're going to cut that off. And if we can't determine if it's a tourist or a non-tourist shop, because without asking all of these merchants to pull up all of their sales by zip code and looking at shipping records and going through that same scrutiny to all of our merchants that come in town. I have a brother who bought a gift for his wife. They live in Ohio, and he bought it at David's, and a beautiful ring, and she wears it every day, but they were here as visitors. So we can't, I think we don't have the data with us and to support making those decisions. So we have to, given lack of data and lack of any kind of plan that's been codified or approved and vetted out for Main Street, diversity also doesn't become something we can look at. So we're sort of stuck with what we have until we move forward and make some of those changes to plan. And at that point, I think we have to go back and look at what Chair Parker said, is this is an established business person, and do we want to look like we are supporting business, or do we want to be a tough hoop to jump
I
through?
definitely support business.
Yeah,
And
it's tough.
I want to also remind you that we did make this kind of decision without the data that you're talking about on the art gallery. We did make, and we have made these kinds of decisions. So I totally respect what you just said, but I also know that that's part of what we do. We have to, as Commissioner Howe said, we're between a rock and a hard place, and sometimes we make the hard decisions, and we hope we're doing the right thing, but can't always know. So, well, I will make a motion to deny this application. And have him stick with the permit that is there. There's a second.
I'd second it.
Roll call.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Kistner,
Yes?
Commissioner Sweeney,
No.
Commissioner Heil,
No.
Chairperson Parker.
No.
So I move that we approve the project with a condition prohibiting the sale of traditional bridal jewelry,
Traditional bridal jewelry.
traditional bridal jewelry, estate jewelry, and loose stones, which reflects the type and character of the jewelry currently sold by Mr. Dahlia, resolution included, and as per is noted in the staff report. Is there a second?
I second. Roll call.
Commissioner Heil,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Yes.
Commissioner Kistner,
No.
Commissioner Monette,
No.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes. Thank you very much for everyone's time. Moving on to item number 8. This is a verbal reports and updates by staff and planning commission. Oh, I'm going to take a break while he gathers his.
No, we don't.
I like the one you put here last week better, Sam.
Last week was better?
Yeah, I like the one you had here last week better.
We very different. Thank you.
All right. Going back to that, moving on to item 8, verbal reports and updates by staff and planning commission, and we have a floor area ratio discussion that I requested on the agenda.
Yeah.
Staff report.
I don't, this is more of a discussion item. I don't have much in the way of a staff report. As we all know, the topic of floor area ratio has been of great interest recently as more and more projects are proposing floor area ratios at or near the maximums allowed. And this is particular concern in the medium density residential district, as a majority of the city's housing stock lies within that district. In particular, we have a set of exemptions, 400 feet for construction of a second unit, 200 square feet for a covered parking space, 120 square feet for a non-inhabitable accessory building, basements and attics are exempt, balconies, porches, decks and things where the longest dimension is unenclosed are also exempt. So basically, the maximums that we have that are shown as far as the maximum gross floor area ratio, they descend down because the larger the parcel, typically you don't, if you had the same floor area ratio for the same size parcels, you could end up with a 15,000 square foot house. Let's say the floor area ratio is 0.25, you have a 60,000 square foot parcel. You could put a 15,000 square foot house on there, and it doesn't really fit in with the character of the community at all. So we have the maximums that are laid out, and then the exemptions, and basically the exemptions add a pretty substantial chunk of square footage onto the maximums.
Perfect, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for staff or comments on this?
Yeah, I do. First and foremost, I'd like to thank staff very much for getting this on the agenda.
Oh, you're welcome. I requested
and,
it.
Chair Parker, very, very much. I mean, I think this is probably the most overbaked potato you could possibly have. And it's really wonderful to have an opportunity to discuss it, especially in the abstract. You know, we're not looking at a house right now and needing to make a determination and a decision tonight. With that said, I'm wondering if staff had the time, and I don't mean this to be a surprise moment or anything, but to do any kind of benchmarking with other communities of any kind?
I looked quite a bit. There isn't anything. I mean, I looked with the American Institute of Architects and here and there. They didn't have anything. Napa, for instance, City Napa doesn't even use floor area ratios for residential homes. They just use their development standards. They only use FAR for commercial buildings because you can have a FAR of over 1 on commercial buildings because they go up higher. So yeah, no real like applicable benchmarks I could find to compare us to, but there may be one out there somewhere.
All right.
Any other questions for staff? All right, well, it's on the agenda. We can talk about it.
Hold on, I just have one. When were these exemptions? Do you have any idea when they were made?
No idea.
Okay.
I know because I dug up a resolution as chair 4 years ago, or 3, that was enacted in 2006. That and I'd have to try and dig through and find it, but it did introduce some of the development standards that we currently use, and the exemptions I think were included in that.
The 400 square feet.
Yeah, I believe I believe it was in 2006 when, as part of our incentivizing infill development, we were doing exemptions and we were doing trying to increase density. So when you add a second unit to a house, you get credit for 2 units on that same parcel, and so in essence that's viewed through our current rules as infill, as adding density closer to the city core, and that was what the policy and the implementing action was at the time.
More than the floor area ratio, I think we have to be concerned with view sheds and people building right on property lines, and how close they are to the neighbors. And I don't think we just want to say, okay, you can take and put so much mass on property without looking at all the things that affect the neighborhood. And this is very easy to come up with mathematical formulas like this, but it's a lot harder to come up, and we've gone through that a lot recently. Mm-hmm. And so I think we've got to really say, what's the core area that we really want to look at, and maybe it's not even the floor area ratio, maybe it's the setbacks and stuff.
And I also just, I said this to Aaron when I asked him to put this on there. This is not to be, for me, wasn't necessarily to be something that's absolutely 100% permanent. It's to deal with the problems that we've had with the applications in front of us for the past year. I would like this to be something that we hopefully do for lack of a better phrase, a Band-Aid fix until the general plan is approved, and then revisit it again. And really, and give us more time to go into it. But I am tired of having my hands tied on applications and not having the municipal code backing up our decisions as strongly as they need to be. And so that's why I want to bring this up and make some revisions. Before we go any further, I do see that there's someone who wants to speak at the public comment hearing forum. So I'm going to open that up before we go any further.
Jeff Meyer, 1269 Allen. It was discussed earlier about how there is a new update to the general plan, but it doesn't exist. It hasn't been voted. It's been changed many times over the last 5 or 6 years. So it really does not exist. We have wishes about what should be in it and what the law should be, but they don't exist. What does exist is the actual municipal code, which says the commission has no latitude on these things. It says in section 17.164.040, limitations of review, the commission is not to use design review intentionally or inadvertently to vary the specific allowances or other development controls. And that refers back to the specific allowances like floor area ratio, setbacks, heights, all the different things that are in the zoning code. It points back to 17.164.010, which says some harmful effects of one land use upon another can be prevented through zoning, subdivision controls, and housing and building codes. But you have some leeway on other things, not on those, but on other things. The other things that you have control over are, and I quote, other aspects of development are more subtle and less amenable to exacting rules of thumb promulgated without regard to specific development proposals. Among these are the general form of the land before and after development. And if I could stop a second. You know, you can't change the lot line very much. The shape of the lot is what it is. So what is it referring to, the general form of the land? Well, we're talking about slopes. Is there a creek there? Is there a hill? Are we going to cut the hill out and make a big ditch? That's what that's talking about. And then the second item, among these are the spatial relationships of the structures and open spaces to proximate land uses, which is sort of what Ms. Kistner was talking about. Where on the property is the open space? You know, there's a rule that says you can only have a 45% lot coverage, so 55% of the lot could be building, I suppose, and only 35% could be floor area ratio, which leaves half of the lot empty space. So you have sway over where on the lot that empty space is. You can force the buyer to put his house at the back or at the front or the side, but you cannot make him make it smaller than the 35. You can ask him if he'd like to, but between the 35% and the 0 is completely up to the property owner, according to the law. Now, on my project, over the course of 4 months, you broke that law to force me, time after time after time, we came back here and you said, oh, it's too massive, it's too big, it's too massive, it's too big, until we finally gave up and mitigated our damages and said, okay, you broke that law. You who don't like to have people break laws, you just said to this guy over here. The third item is, and the appearance, you have sway over the appearances of buildings and open spaces as they contribute to an area as it is being developed. So you have, like, complete control over the architecture. These are subjective things that they give you sway over. But they say, again, I'll say, the commission is not to use design review intentionally or inadvertently to vary the specific allowances of other development controls. So, until they finish the new general plan, and until it has this language in it the way you want, and then that's put into the municipal code, you have no sway over it at all, according to the law. And if you direct him to vary these things like you've been talking about, you would become a criminal enterprise, doing an ongoing criminal enterprise, directing somebody to break the law. Like you did on my project. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak at the public hearing? Seeing none, I'll close that and invite commissioner discussion.
Well, is what he said true?
No, it's not. I respectfully disagree.
You guys can make suggestions to municipal code revisions that can be brought to city council. That's well within your...
What, did this come down from the Romans?
Mm-hmm. So, do we have suggestions? Because I know I definitely do. Does anyone else?
If I could just make a observation. I've been doing this stuff a long time, working for different cities and all of that. St. Helena is the first city that I've seen that has an FAR as it applies to residential use, and I think you see an FAR used mostly in commercial applications, and it seems to fit better there, or kind of a cleaner fit there, and deals with issues because you can have buildings of 5, 10 stories, and it's a good way of getting at the whole issue of building massing. In the case of residential, you don't see too many 3-story homes very often, so you're dealing with 1- and 2-story homes. And I think what tends to happen is people, and maybe even some of the comments that were just made are relevant to this point, people see a number and they say, I'm allowed that. And they don't realize that those are maximums. The code says these aren't, and right here it says maximum. Unfortunately, right. But the way it ends up kind of working out is the maximum part gets kind of lost in the discussion, as I think it was to some extent just minutes ago. And what ends up happening then is the city ends up in this kind of defensive position where people are claiming they have this right, and then you have to prove somehow that you don't have that right. And so the onus of burden of proof is on the city to explain as to why you can't reach this maximum. And I think that's one of the unintended consequences of trying to use FAR to regulate residential development. I really think in other places I've worked, you have a combination of setbacks. You can have setbacks that vary based on the height of the building. You can have a number of other, kinds of things, and then you can have some good policy direction in terms of massing and character and that kind of thing. You can define that for different neighborhoods in the city, et cetera.
And that's kind of what we do with the conditions, is we.
Correct. But at any rate, if my thought or recommendation would be is that this isn't something that's broke that can be fixed. I think it's just it's kind of the wrong tool in the wrong place, and I think it makes sense for non-residential, but for residential, I think for that very reason that just talking about that, it's not a good way to approach the issue.
So can I ask you this, Victor? Are you saying that we are kind of going down a rabbit hole by getting into more detail here when we really should be walking it back and trying to pull FAR out of the conversation, or certainly out of the code altogether, and have it strike that, and just get back to more conceptual?
And again, I'm just going to interject, is the reason that I brought this up is I think that we do need a FAR solution for right now as the Band-Aid, so that we can buy time to get into those conceptual things with the different setbacks based on the height of the building, et
But
cetera.
aren't we then just setting more bad precedent and again kind of putting a frame around something that we're hearing from
once
Victor
again,
isn't a good thing to
I
be
think
framing?
looking towards the future, I think simply emphasizing the point, and maybe it should have been emphasized to just in the person that just spoke, that these are maximums, and even language that would talk about situations in which the maximums may be appropriate to even be looked at might be one way of getting at it. But I think in the long run, from my opinion, the city's best served by eliminating FARs as a tool and relying on a combination of more traditional setbacks, height limits, and some good policy language that allow flexibility in different situations, and move forward from that. But to the immediate point, other than I'm not sure how you would fix the numbers, to be honest. I mean, it's so complicated with the sliding scale, and for the reason Aaron just mentioned, you can't use one number. One size doesn't fit all, because if you have a 2-acre lot, then you end up at a 0.25 FAR, as he mentioned, with a 15,000 or something square foot home. But maybe we could look at some policy language that would kind of, fit or help frame, this. And I think would be helpful too, and we could maybe bring this. I don't think we're going to resolve this issue in one meeting. We could simply bring back some examples of what the FARs are out there currently in neighborhoods. I know we tried that to some extent on the Pine Street project, and that perhaps didn't go so well. But simply looking to see how it works or fits in certain neighborhoods, and what they are currently and how that comports with this. But at any rate, that's just my thoughts.
If we were to remove FAR from the considerations, how would we do that?
Well, it wouldn't be that we would just take it out and replace it with nothing. It would be in the context of an overall update of the zoning ordinance, and I think then you would come up with setbacks and height limits, and tie better the height issue to the setback, but perhaps more importantly, policy language that deals with the variety of situations, even specifically mentioning things like flag lots, where the home, usually in the back lot, literally is in the backyards of other people's houses. So I think that gets you to a better place. So it's more than just simply excising this. I think if you try to excise this without the other part, then you may end up in a worse place.
So I'm thinking maybe we could just have this fee here, but add some language somewhere that it is one consideration.
Yeah, but see, the problem is that we tell people that, and they still just want. The problem is that it's a desirable place to live, and people buy these $1 million empty lots, and they want to maximize the space that they have on those lots, and they want their $3 million house.
But if they're told that if somewhere when they look at this, it's defined as one piece of what's going to be considered when they come to apply for a permit.
I think that we're always going to run into the problem, though, of people bringing it up and wanting to maximize it out. So. And
I suppose it's a little bit like having a bar and saying you may only consume 20 drinks.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, yeah. I mean, it's a little bit like we'd be much better off just not saying there's a maximum. Right. You have to design a reasonable project that fits the setbacks, that fits the restrictions.
But
so, I mean, I hadn't specifically until this discussion, thought of taking FAR off the table for residential. But I see it misleads people. It's like having a bar and saying maximum.
Think about the last discussion we had
where CMU has come back with what some of the other communities about our size are doing with this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I mean rich communities. I don't mean rich.
Sausalito, Mill Valley, those types of communities that are landlocked.
How are they approving or disapproving this kind of thing?
But then I think you have to, and I don't know that staff has the time, given what we saw on Friday.
That's true.
In all reality, you can't, again, we're talking about one isolated item. If we say, go tell us what everybody's doing with FAR, but we're not saying, is there a context, back to Ms. Erickson's point, in absence of design?
I think the whole code needs to be.
All right, and so we can't look at we don't have the capacity right now to fix all of it, than to be focusing even more attention on something that doesn't necessarily give us the end result that we want. And it also sets us up for examples like we had in the last, one of the discussions in the last couple of meetings, where we list FAR of other homes in the area, and it just becomes a point of contention if they're inaccurate, if it's all in perception. And so we're putting something out that we all agree is problematic, and we're kind of now putting even more emphasis and doubling down on it, when perhaps we step back.
We need to back off.
We do some research or find folks that can go out and do some benchmarking with other communities, but do that in context of all elements that are considered, not just FAR.
I agree.
I hate to break it to you, I think that we'll still be talking about this in 4 years then. And so we don't have that kind of time. This is a serious problem that
Not if we take it off altogether. It won't be, if we remove it, we won't be talking about it in its isolation, because it'll be part of a greater context conversation.
But then what's the limit? I mean, we need to replace it with some limiting factor.
Well, perhaps when people first go.
Well, there's a sorry.
Perhaps when people first go into the planning department, and if the FAR is still there, it can be explained to them that this is one piece and that these other issues are also going. I mean, do you already do that? Is that what you're saying?
Right. I mean, actually, it's not that difficult to get data from other jurisdictions. There's this thing called the listserv that the state kind of runs, where you can put a question out. It goes to all the planning departments in the state. Well, and so there are a couple of tools. I mean, if this is something we could bring back, let's say in another month with maybe some options.
If it's not difficult.
So we can take it kind of a step at a time. But I really do think that the way it is right now, it does a disservice to the city, puts both the staff and the commission in a defensive position where people feel like they've had those 20 drinks taken away from them. And
I also think it is causing some of this a fight between different portions of the city. I think it's causing problems between our residents also because of this.
I mean, our residents.
And I guess one of the things I'd like from you is, what would be the process to do something with this? I mean, beside us sitting here talking about it. I mean, what kind of process would we have to go through?
What it could be is simply a kind of a targeted zoning ordinance cleanup. I mean, Aaron and I have been going through, and there's other sections on FAR that are completely incomprehensible. they just frankly don't make a lot of sense. So I think, and it's a timing issue, but given, I think, the importance of it, and I mean, it's almost in some way emergency because it just keeps coming up, that one could look at a targeted update focusing on this whole question of development intensity and the regulations as they apply to the amount of development in residential, that then you could do a code update just focusing on that, and it would just be a couple of the zoning districts that would be affected because all of the action really is in the low density and the medium density zone, and so you could do this smaller zoning ordinance update, and then that could wait for because the comprehensive code update that's going to tie to the general plan is something that I agree, Chair Parker, is going to be a ways off in the distance. So
Yeah,
so maybe
we just need to triage this.
we could look towards something more short term, come back to you, let's say in a month, and just take it kind of a step at a time, and then could be at a point saying, okay, this is the scope of what we want to do, and then we could, figure out how to get the resources to put that together, and that's something the commission could initiate, and then that would go up to council.
That's fine. I
think we shouldn't. Sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
Not to steal your thunder, but Chair Parker had some ideas, I think, and I'd like to hear them.
Just to start, I would just like to, if I know that in the long run, I would like to remove FAR. I do like the idea of removing it. I think that it's not conducive to residential areas. But in the meantime, I was going to say that we lower the floor area ratio number from 0.36 down to 0.3 or something lower like that, and then have it be kind of take this and just kind of squish it up a little bit so that those.
Can we do that?
But what would that be based on? That'd be
Yeah,
arbitrary.
I feel like we need some sort of justification for that.
And we have homes out there that already.
Massing on small lots.
But you just picked out, I mean, in all due respect, it sounds like it's sort of picked out, we could say 31, 32, whatever, but it's still not based on any specific factor.
It's just arbitrary.
And we have homes out there built above it and below it.
I guess I was asking Aaron what these are based on, but
No idea.
no idea.
Yeah, and that's the whole point. Is that I believe in my very brief research on this. So this is something that Carol Poole came up with several years ago, and just kind of threw out some arbitrary numbers to begin with. So that's why I don't really see too much of a problem of putting an arbitrary Band-Aid on it, to not have such large FAR numbers in our residential areas for the time being. I'm seeing that I'm getting a little, people don't want to do that, so I'll just move on to the next things. I'd love to remove the exemption for second units and for garages.
Yeah, I think we
And
can
I
do
say
that
do
right
that
now.
right
I
now.
think that's the triage. That's the triage step because that's an arbitrary exemption.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that projects, again, somebody's still coming in looking at this, if they don't have those exemptions and we're not seeing, here's your true
not gonna
FAR,
do
but
it.
here's your adjusted FAR, then at least we're all on the same page with one
Numbers.
FAR in the interim,
But before we throw the
in
baby
the
out
absence of
with
a
the-
vacuum.
Before we throw the baby out with bathwater, I'm thinking that since I'm fine with getting rid of the covered parking, but I'm thinking since we still support second units in the
Okay,
town.
so-
wait, let me finish. That maybe if we kept that, it could be if it doesn't change the footprint of the foundation.
I was actually going to do one better,
Okay,
but
do one better.
I was going to say, and I might meet some, I don't know. I was going to say that if you do, to get that exemption, it has to be a registered low-income, affordable second unit.
But isn't,
Deed restricted.
It's deed restricted.
isn't that coming up in the housing element? So isn't that sort of, will be taken care of?
Right. I mean, that was the recommendation from the Planning Commission, and that was what City Council directed staff to do in the wording that we forwarded on to the state. So that's now in the housing element going to the state. So simply as a matter of, given those decisions, we can immediately enforce that in terms of the calculations.
So we wouldn't have to say it specifically.
Well, you would then modify the code to fit the housing element, right?
Once again, that would be eventually. I think what I'm thinking of doing. I mean, the idea is to look at the direction from the commission. So when we do analysis, we can do it in the kind of terminology and the approach that you want. I guess I'm a little hesitant to do just those small of amendments, particularly and just moving the number a bit, because then you get into these, detailed discussions. I think, and in the end anyway, you don't need to meet the maximum, so they are just maximum. So I think if you could tell us how you want staff to interpret it and to measure it in the analysis when we come forward with staff reports, we can do that, and we can inform the applicants of that, and we can just use that as a workaround. If somebody challenges us, we'll just say it's maximums, and sure, challenge it, but this is what the commission considers to be more of a valid FAR number as opposed to an FAR number that has less validity.
So what I'm hearing you say, and kind of the summary of the discussion is, don't change the FAR number, leave it alone, but do strike the exemptions. Part of the second unit will be tied back to housing element discussion, and when that comes back from the state, and then the other exemptions that we have in here that are garage and parking and all that can be taken out, and that's something that's workable.
Yeah, it's the covered parking and the non-habitable accessory. Yeah.
20 square feet, I think, total.
That's not what I heard. I'd like to find out if that's accurate.
Well, what I was saying is, at this point in time, and that could change, I'd prefer simply that we do the analysis based on that direction from you without a formal change to the code, and then we'll tell applicants this is what the commission has directed us in terms of the calculations, and they want to use this as the benchmark. You can argue about it all day, but these are maximums, and the commission has a latitude to do it the high or the low range of that. If we get a lot of pushback, then perhaps we go in and formally amend the code. What I'd like to do is use the time and resources for that sort of more global fix on the FAR in terms of amending the code to take it out and to look at the other directed changes in terms of intensity of residential.
I guess, I mean, just one of the things I picked up on from what you just said is that, if you receive pushback, we are receiving pushback. I'm trying to make it so that this is not, right now, this discussion is not reactionary to any active applicant right now. So we're in a really clean spot where no one can come back and sue us for discriminating against them. And that's kind of why I feel...
We don't know what he's got in the pipeline either.
Well, I don't, so that's why don't tell me.
Right. So we can take the next step. I mean, we can make it it's going to be an ordinance change, and we can bring that forward, and we can indicate that this is simply a short-term workaround, and it's to achieve consistency with the housing element decisions and kind of go from there. So
I would love some sort of baby step, just some baby step. I think it needs to be done as soon as possible.
My experience with the zoning ordinance text amendment is it isn't as easy as one might wish.
It sometimes can take a year.
Right. There's two readings of council.
And I'm sure
even to
people are gonna
change
have
one
comments.
sentence, correct?
It's the same. It's full public hearings.
It's full public hearings. So I mean, I feel like here we are again in the space where we want to make triage decision, but it's really like, look, we need to do major heart surgery, and we know we need to do it. So why are we going to just put in another stent when we know we got to replace the heart? And the only reason I say that is because whatever we do, any adjustment of any kind, even one sentence or one exemption, has to go through 2 hearings here, 2 hearings at council. And so it seems like, these things have to be and should be done once and done well and done completely.
I'm just saying, though, is that while we're waiting for all of that to happen, we're going to have how many months, if not years, of having to deal with a really antiquated system.
Well, I hear what you're saying. I totally do. And I respect what you're saying. However, I think for me anyway, personally, with this discussion and the support I'm hearing from the planning department, that I don't think it'll be that difficult to handle the misunderstandings about FAR coming up in the future, for me anyway. It won't be it won't present the conflict that I have felt before. I feel more confident, first of all, in what it really means, and that it's okay for us to explain that the FAR number is not just this absolute thing, all these other things are involved too, and to trust that down the line it's all going, as the heart replacement will take place.
And if we go through the effort of tweaking numbers arbitrarily and go through the readings and all the process it's going to take to have it approved, in essence, we're saying we really think this is important,
Well,
and we really are going to hold. And
I
this is-
had just said that the numbers aren't
We're
like
not.
the big thing right now. I just want to get rid of the exemptions. Like, that's what I want to do.
Part of it, but
The exemptions, to be clear, the exemptions would require the same process. So even if we just eliminated one exemption, ugh. I mean, I agree with you.
I just,
I'm
you know,
completely of two minds on
Three
this.
of them right now and have him start working on it.
Me too, because I'm sorry, of 4 years on this planning commission, these exemptions are a pain.
Longer than
And we keep kicking
And we
the can.
keep, and we
keep
keep,
kicking
and
the
it's,
can
we need to do
every
something.
single
We
day.
need to
I
make,
think maybe what we could do.
and we might not even, all we're doing is recommending this to city council. What they do with it, and then with the public hearing and listening to what the public has to say, that still needs to happen.
I think it's going to be distracting and misunderstood, though. I think what Victor just said was important, and I think that the way we can get rid of the exemption is by, in our own minds, when we're dealing with the FAR and with the.
I know, but I'm gonna interrupt you, Bobby, just because it doesn't help us because.
What doesn't help? You didn't.
Okay, so we're gonna redo the ordinance. We're gonna talk about the municipal code and all that sort of thing, and we're gonna have to explain to the people who come to the public hearings what that means.
Well, that's not what I was
You
trying
d-
to suggest.
When you teach children and you teach people things, you start small and then you build upon what you're learning. I think that the citizens of St. Helena will be able to understand why we want to remove these 3 exemptions fairly easily, get that done, and then step 2.
Except for the restricted.
Well,
Except for the restricted.
I don't agree with removing all of them anyway. I'm not in agreement with removing the second unit. I mean, that's just my personal.
No, she just said with the restriction for the
Well, it
for
doesn't
the
need
housing element.
restriction, though, because with the restriction's going to be in the housing element.
It was voted here, and the city council voted it last Tuesday night. So did you not say that that's in the planning?
It's been submitted.
So it doesn't
It's been
need
submitted to HCD.
So it doesn't need to be a caveat.
We're asking that the ordinance reflect that it's part of the housing element.
What the
It
new
references.
housing element is saying.
All I'm saying is I've done enough of teaching things to people. You have to start small and then you build upon what you've learning. And I don't want to overwhelm them. And Matt, you know from writing an ordinance that even small tweaks, people sometimes can totally misinterpret them, and you get sidetracked and blown off course. And that's why baby steps.
So what we could do is, and this is kind of a study session item, so you really can't do an action. So what we can do it for the next meeting is essentially write this up in terms of this immediate exemption fix, bring that, put it on the agenda, and then you can vote on that and say, yes, you want to move that forward, and we can get that going. So that would be the
I think it should be
approach.
written like you guys submitted the housing element, Victor.
Okay.
And I just want to say, I understand what all of you are saying
let-
about that we need to do it right at once and all that stuff, but I really feel with this situation, it's the slow and steady, one step at a time, because that's our biggest
But you're not
enemy.
going to address. He's not going to address FAR in this
No,
discussion.
no. It's just those exemptions, because I feel like we go, we have to change this, and it becomes this huge bubble of it's just you cannot comprehend it. These 3 things are super comprehensible, and we could just.
Well, let's talk about the third, because we didn't talk about that at
Okay.
all. The 120 square foot accessory building. I really don't have a problem with that. I mean, in my mind, that's a shed, in somebody's backyard. It's 120 square feet. So, I mean, whether we're going to wind up using FAR or not using FAR, I don't know that should be counted in the size of the house.
And real quick too, I think when we're getting these proposals, people aren't going to be putting their sheds on there. They're going to be doing whatever they want to do and adding them later.
So should we just take that? If we do take it off and the exemption goes away, it's just gone?
Yeah, I think we can take it off because.
Yeah.
What was that?
What do you mean? If you take it off, then it's no longer an exemption. Is that what you're saying?
You can still have a shed. It's just you don't get to have it's like a bonus.
120 square feet is the maximum size you can have without sprinkling a building, right?
200.
Or is it 250?
250.
What is the logic between 100? For 120. Again, we don't know the logic for any of
Could
this.
be a Sears shed of some sort.
It should be 250 because that was the ordinance was changed like last
And
year.
also, how many times did they say they're going to have a shed and not build a shed and just took the bonus? Just saying.
Okay. Well,
No, that's what we're saying.
I mean, if it's non-habitable, like you say, there's no reason for design review, so they build it after they're done.
Well,
I just feel like the
If they
numbers.
do,
I just feel the
as a
numbers
permitted
should be
building.
the numbers.
Yeah. Okay. I agree with that. What about basements and attics? You agree?
well, there's not really a number on it, but it also doesn't take over, it's not part of the basement. It's not habitable, so it's,
Well, it might be.
it says non-habitable.
So non-habitable is
Supposed to be not
exempt.
conditioned, no air conditioning, no insulation.
I think the only time that came up was that house on Flag Lot off of Spring Street, behind the Escareños house. And remember?
Yeah, we
and
wanted
they
them-
wanted that basement, the half basement, and they said, we're not conditioning it. It can't count towards FAR. You guys remember it? Come on.
I remember.
So,
Pictures.
yeah.
Yeah, and then,
So-
then you saw the wine cellar going in.
Right. So, I don't know. Maybe we just, again.
I mean,
and then what about balconies, decks, porches? I mean, this is an interesting one because we do have some houses in St. Helena that probably have about 1,000 square feet.
Or the house that was on the Spring Mountain, where
Sure,
half of
yeah.
it was
Right.
porches.
We had 18,000 square feet of porch or whatever it was.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's
it all
again,
go?
it's.
Again, if FAR is, if we're saying FAR is not,
I just want the accurate numbers.
Who cares what's exempt?
Yeah,
but
I'm comfortable with pulling, if that's what the question is, yes, I'm comfortable with striking exemptions or exceptions.
Yeah.
But I'm not comfortable with arbitrarily changing them.
Yeah, just
Given that we have
the,
too many people that start doing math.
Right now.
strike all 5 bullets.
just strike all 5.
I mean,
Okay.
and that's in the new housing element, so it's not like we're doing something that nobody's heard.
Yeah.
Because we heard it all last week a couple of times.
And that's just, step 1, and then do our research and, come back and, do this the right way, but still just try not to be like, oh, projects take a lot of steps, and this is just step 1 of a million.
So that's not too
I can
difficult
support
to do,
that.
so it shouldn't take too much time.
Yeah. Okay,
Is
so
that correct, Victor?
I'm sorry.
You
what?
said this shouldn't take too much time because it's not that difficult? It's not going to take a lot of staff time?
No. This should not take a lot of staff time.
Okay,
It's
'cause,
just
I mean,
it's more
I just want-
procedural,
The proce-
hearings, noticing, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Looks like we
yeah,
actually have some
we have a question.
comment.
We already did earlier when the gentleman spoke. Usually we do public comment before.
I think we could.
But sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we want to hear what you have to say, so yeah, just come up to the microphone if you don't mind.
As you can
Yeah.
tell, we're getting excited about doing something for a change.
Donna Hines, Pratt Avenue. I guess just one question is I am planning a house. I've already met with Aaron. I don't know if you remember. So I'm an architect working on plans with the guest house or second unit, and I just don't know how you would address something like that where we're already.
I think there is a legal start time to when this would trigger for projects and the point of where your project is, correct?
Right. The city has complete flexibility in terms of how it wants to implement it. So and the soonest, obviously, it could happen is when the ordinance goes into effect, which is going to be a couple of months out. So then it could be written in such a way that all applications that are submitted prior to the ordinance, that second reading, actually it's 30 days after the second reading. So realistically, we're looking at 3 or 4 months, even if we got going on this immediately. So if an application came in the door in that time, it should be exempt.
And then just one other thought, when you talk about eliminating FARs, I'm just looking at it from the perspective of people coming to St. Helena that are wanting to buy property, wanting to buy a piece that they can build on. My concern is if they don't know what they can build, what does that do to the value of the property, and then what does that do to your tax base? Because the realtors will be the first one to start warning people or telling them, it is very unclear what you can build here, and that may scare people away. I mean, at least if you have a maximum, even if you make it really clear to people, which I agree with you, that this is just a maximum, this is just a guideline, at least they will kind of have a little bit of feeling of, if you're going to spend $1 million, like you said, on a lot, you need to have a little bit of comfort to know what you can do with that.
Yeah, and that's why we said if we're going to get rid of the FAR, we're going to replace it with something that would give those guidelines. It's not
But I'm not sure how setbacks can achieve that. I mean, if you have no idea what square footage you could build. I mean, I don't know what the other communities here are doing, but I have built several homes in Texas, and they all had FARs, and so you did know what your limitations were. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's why we're not going to just get rid of FARs without something to replace it. All right, does anyone else have anything else to direct Victor and Aaron with?
Well, I'm just wondering, the direction for you, is that supposed to be a unanimous thing or just, yeah?
No, I mean, the way it's set tonight on the agenda is just a discussion item. What we'll do at the next commission meeting, which is St. Patrick's Day, which sort of fits the how many drinks thing, but
Are you furnishing the Guinness?
maybe I shouldn't say that.
Sorry, I should say 50 on St. Patrick's Day.
So
17.
So there will be an
Revised
agenda item that will be to direct staff to initiate, and we'll describe what we've heard tonight, and then you'll vote on that.
Okay.
So we're not doing
I think it's also worth just stating for the purpose of the record that I believe that the lady said Pratt Avenue. I'm not sure if that would be low density residential or
Or
medium.
ag.
Or ag.
I might be
even.
A20.
What the zoning is. Okay. Okay. Well, again, my concern as a commissioner is in the medium density residential. I think that's where we're running into to all the issues. I think in low density, I'm not saying that we should, if we
Ignore
get
it.
exemptions from FAR, we get exemptions from FAR removed from the code because they're just misleading and they're confusing. But I think we would have almost
I don't think you see in the low density, I don't think you see anybody building from
Right up against their
property line
neighbor's
to
line.
property line like
Right,
we've been
like
seeing.
we've been seeing in
That's
medium
what we're
density.
trying to stop, is the property line to property line building.
Right. Or
I don't
up-
know how you can how people can live in that, but
Right.
I don't think
Yeah.
they're living in it. I think they're trying to sell it.
And I do think, with uncertainty of any regulations of any kind, I think it does, make market adjustments. And the last thing I think we want to say is don't buy in St. Helena. It's completely unpredictable. I think what actually has happened is because we've had this situation where it's almost been incentivizing maxing out and getting exemptions here and there. People are overbuilding lots just for the sake of maxing out all the exemptions.
And it's not part of this. It doesn't fit in with the St. Helena nature.
And then they're frustrated because they get continued 2 or 3 or 4 times, as our gentleman who just left, because we wind up having to back off, as Mr. Cornelius said, kind of from this defensive position, and we have needless squabbles where we kind of don't need to. If we could set the expectations a little more up front, then people could design freely within the marketplace, and hopefully people will continue to want to invest in St. Helena. That's the hope of everybody, I think.
Yeah.
It's just we don't. What we're finding are situations that are just clusters, in a neighborhood, Stockton Street, et cetera. That's what we're finding.
Perfect. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to comment?
Yes, on this issue? Or? Oh, no, I have something else.
Okay. Anything else to staff? Staff, anything from us? Okay, so we'll end item 8. No, just not the meeting. But Bobby has, Bobby, you have something?
Well, we don't do, agenda forecast anymore, but I know that Chair Parker last time we met, mentioned that she thought it would be a good idea to have another public hearing on the housing element. And I've had a lot of input from the public who could not make the 4 o'clock city council meeting last week, that they would really like more opportunity before May to be heard and to get on record in a discussion, public comments about the housing element. And I know you had mentioned you wanted to do that.
I want to have a second.
I didn't know what the status of that was, and I would really like to see that. I mean, I'm getting a lot of pressure from people. So
That's an excellent point. We can put that on the agenda for the next meeting for the 17th, and then look at perhaps at the first meeting in April as a possible date for that.
Okay. So we will bring it up and
point.
discuss it next.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Anything else that they'd like to ask of staff at this time? All right. I'd like to adjourn the meeting. See you in 2 weeks.